All right, welcome everybody to Toronto chapter of CSNP, our second webinar, but actually a Zoom meeting today. We got something special going on along with the regular meeting, and we're having Checkmarx speak here about putting security into DevOps. I'd just like to just give a reiteration that tonight we're also having the contest, the CodeBash contest. A number of you have registered for the CodeBash contest. Now, unbeknownst to me and to us, quite frankly, we have the email addresses of everybody that signed up for CodeBash, but I don't have your names for whatever reason. So in order to set up the breakout room, I'm going to give everybody access to the breakout room when it's time to go to the CodeBash. And for those of you that did pre-register for the CodeBash contest, I'll let you guys go into the breakout room, and then those that did not register, if you get put in the breakout room, you can just pop back out and come back to the general meeting to keep talking. So that's going to be it for me to speak right now. Johnson, to give you a minute or two to welcome everybody. Oh, did we lose Johnson? All right, well, I'm not gonna stop here. I'm gonna keep going. Stephen, do we still have you connected?
Yes, I'm on the line.
Great. Stephen, would you like to give a little intro to Checkmarx?
Sure, thanks so much for the time. We're super pleased to be able to present this in conjunction with CSNP. We hope to have this as an educational session that'll kind of give you a line of sight into what the motions of putting security into DevOps looks like from our perspective as an approach. We've organized a session. It is going to be around operational, so I pulled together a speaker who's worked a lot with customers and have helped them with their outcomes, as well as something to make it fun, which is the CodeBash session, as you try to look at your dev team and your goals, and you think, well, how do I get people trained up on security, up to speed on, say, OWASP, and conforming to things like PCI or HIPAA and so forth. So that CodeBash session does have prizes. Hopefully you signed up for it. So make sure you go over there. They're pretty good prizes. They range from 300, 150, and then 100 for a third prize. With that said, there will be, in closing, an offer for the first 5 people who respond and say, hey, you know what, we like what we heard and we want to try and put this to practice. So we're putting an offer for a free scan and some time with our services team to kind of go through an evaluation and say, here's some areas to hone in on and areas to focus on so that you can stack, rank, and prioritize vulnerabilities and cybersecurity errors within your application as you develop them, whether they're legacy or net new applications. Thanks very much, and welcome everybody to the session today.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Stephen.
Lee, John, I don't know. I mean, something just happened when I was going to tell these very, very interesting stories. So that's for another day. But all the same, I was going to say that, I'm very, very excited, seeing the numbers pop up here. And given that we've been at this only for just about 2 to 3 months, and we already have close to 130 members joining our chapter. So this is awesome. And I know for a fact that today's session is going to be, just another step up from what we did a couple of weeks ago. So really excited. And, thanks everyone for joining this with us.
Of course. Yes, Thank you very much. A little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to give a quick shout out to next week's CSNP event. It's Amanda Crofton from our Seattle chapter. Her webinar is titled Fighting the Right Fires, Logical Vulnerability and Risk Assessment. Go to csnp.org to find out more about this, to register, and do a whole lot of other stuff. Normally, I'd have a slide and everything else ready to present, but as I said, we're doing this differently today. We're not doing a webinar, we're doing a Zoom meeting. So I'm going to go a little bit off track and just verbally announce this. Again, csnp.org to learn everything. I'm not going to speak too much more other than to say I put in the group chat, if anybody, for all those that registered for the Code Bash contest, could you please just throw a little note in the chat? You can put it to everyone, or you can do it just to me. I'm listed as the admin, and then of course you could just throw it out to everybody, of course, and just say I registered for the Code Bash, so I can maybe get you properly in the breakout room. So without anything else, Stephen, why don't I pass off to you to get things going from Checkmarx.
Okay, many thanks. I think actually if you switch and pivot to Nathan, you should have his presentation up. What we will step through is just at a high level some of the theory, the thinking, and the approach, and what we've heard a lot from customers. So if you have questions from an operational viewpoint of how did things go from an implementation perspective, he would definitely be the right guy to ask those questions of.
Okay, I've asked Nathan to start his video when he can.
Hey, yeah, so I'm here. Sorry, my camera's not actually working at the moment, but I hope you can see my presentation.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. My name's Nathan Leach. I am a solutions architect for Checkmarx in North America. And tonight the topic is putting security in DevOps. So let's go to the next. There we go. So the agenda, pretty brief. This is supposed to be somewhat of a brief talk. I mean, I could probably talk for several hours about this particular topic. And in fact, you know, when I go to customer sites, often that's what we do, is we talk about putting some automation into the DevOps process. So, you know, security and the speed of DevOps, always an interesting topic as to, why security doesn't tend to speed up much for DevOps, and there's some challenges there. And then implementing DevSecOps automation, go into some of the concepts around that. And then I'll cover some brief benefits of an AppSec program. And probably many of you know these things, and there's probably no way I could also, in 20 minutes, talk about the benefits of an AppSec program. But I'll give it a shot for a few high level items. So anyway, so security and the speed of DevOps. So let's think about what it was before DevOps, right? So prior to DevOps, security was often, maybe not always, often a release gate, right? And I know in many organizations I've been in, it was something that everybody saved for the last minute because nobody wanted to touch it, right? And a lot of the problem was that you couldn't sometimes because it required a pen test, and these are typically manual. It requires a deployment and a runtime for somebody to perform the pen test. It takes a lot of time. They may have questions. It may be some back and forth with the development team. And you know, it was something that was just really unpleasant. Nobody wanted to deal with. And one of the issues you had with that was they're prone to missing vulnerabilities, because your pen testing is only as good as your scenarios that you're testing. And it's very easy to miss scenarios, you know, especially with somewhat of a manual pen testing. And even from an automation perspective, it's difficult. In a lot of cases, they'll pick up software implementation vulnerabilities, but often a problem is that you miss out on vulnerabilities that are introduced based on due to deployment misconfiguration or differences in environments, because often you're deploying something for pen test and maybe a pre-prod or a staging environment that you then later move to prod. And I've seen my share of prod and staging configuration differences introducing issues. There's always a chance that something's going to be missed. So in any case, you know, and addressing vulnerabilities after development is complete is often very problematic, right? Because in some organizations, maybe not all, but they'll disband the development team. Maybe they'll keep a small maintenance development team, but they'll move their members to other projects, right? And so doing major work becomes kind of an issue. And then of course, by the time you have finished your software development, if there's a vulnerability due to an architectural flaw, that can be extremely costly to fix, because that tends to mean that there's a major amount of work to do to remediate that vulnerability. So the idea of DevOps came along because there was a need to release software faster. Software-defined infrastructure made that possible in a lot of cases. Let me go ahead and do that. And typically, and people realize, we need to insert some security into that development lifecycle. So the concept of DevSecOps is born, right? And in a lot of cases, the insertion of security in DevOps can involve several things. And a few things that I can call out that are easy to describe, or maybe an architectural review as part of the design process. Peer code reviews that may start incorporating more security-focused reviews rather than just assessing implementation quality. But ever more popular are automated application security testing. So this can be something that is maybe static or interactive, and often it's done either pre or post build, right? And I'll go over some of the things that make some of this possible, and maybe some advantages as to some of the different ways to do it. So let's see, let me get to the next slide here. Okay, so let's talk about implementing some of that automation, right? Because that's usually where everybody focuses. They want something that's automated, that means that the evaluation gets done without a lot of manual intervention, and it's done quickly and efficiently. So, one of the main things that you want to do when you're talking about automation is, of course, tool selection, right? And so in a lot of the cases, we have customers that come to us and this is their first, foray into implementing an AppSec program. What can they do to provide, visibility to their risk with the least amount of effort? And so a lot of them consider static application security testing, or you'll see the term SAST, right? And essentially, if you don't know about SAST, it's essentially performing an analysis of the data flows by looking at the source code. So it's analyzing the source code, it's calculating data flows, and then based upon those data flows, assessing, using some intelligence that everybody's learned about all these vulnerabilities over time, and assessing if the data flow it poses something that's vulnerable or not. And the great thing about this type of approach is that in most cases, it's a point and scan, right? You just need to have the source code available. And because it's analyzing source code, there's no build required. There's no runtime required. There's no special environment necessarily required to perform that scan in most cases. And often it's possible to assess your potential risk without having a really deep background in programming. Now, of course, some is always helpful. When I say deep background in programming, I'm talking about you could just sit down with the compiler and bang out something, better than Hello World in a couple hours, right? You would have some idea based upon the results and what they're reporting, because a lot of AppSec people understand what the OWASP top 10, they understand beyond the top 10 what some of the vulnerabilities mean. And you can make some sort of an assessment about your potential risk. And maybe later you'll have some deeper dive, more, somebody with a deeper background in development assessing whether or not these vulnerabilities are valid, or if, it's maybe missing some vulnerabilities and so on and so forth. And so, that's a pretty easy win for AppSec to, at least if you're scanning several applications, understand have a very basic comprehension of the risk for each of your projects. And of course, the scans do not interrupt the software development process, which is usually a really big thing, right? Because developers tend to not want to touch anything that they don't understand deeply. It may not be viable to, stop developers. Maybe they're fully committed to delivering code and just don't have time for the next year. I'm joking about that. but what they need to do is, often it's hard to get them to sit down and pay attention to a concept or a tool that does not get them closer to their delivery deadline or their delivery commitments. So of course, once you've selected your tool, you want to automate those repeated scans, right? Because the developers are making changes to the code, and every change represents a potential new vulnerability. And so often the approach is to integrate these scans into an existing build process. And most everybody, I mean, at least these days, back in the old days, most people had, loaded up the code on their desktop and performed a build, and maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. But these days, development organizations use what they call CI/CD tools that typically perform an automated build. And so a lot of this stuff is built, along lockstep with the actual software development process. So, anything that's really complex in the build has been handled in this script, and it's, a very methodical way of performing build that's established. And so, a small amount of configuration or scripting usually allows you to insert the scan into an existing build script. And this is, one of the ways that people do it. But there's a way that a lot of people are approaching it now, which I'll actually cover in a lot more depth in the next part of the talk. And that is to integrate the scan into source control management via webhooks. And so, a lot of development organizations are moving to a Git-based source control management system. A lot of these Git SCMs have a concept called webhook, which means that whenever something happens to the code, a notification is fired off to a remote service. And what that allows us to do is perform scans on commit or scans on merge, right? So a commit means, I'm committing a code change to a repository or a branch. And of course, merge is something that happens when it's sort of a specialized code change. It means you're taking one branch and combining the code with, maybe your delivery branch, right? Okay, so then you're doing scanning, right? Everything's going great, but now you have vulnerabilities that are being reported, right? And the biggest challenge once the scanning is implemented is getting the developers to address the vulnerabilities. And if anybody's ever really worked with developers, you know that developers will tend to want to ignore things they don't fully understand. It's like, procrastination to the extreme. So I have a list of scan results. I'm a developer, and I have somebody that, I don't report to, that is not governing my, my deadlines, is not telling me I have my deliveries, and they're giving me a list of vulnerabilities I need to look at. Not a really popular way to get the developers to buy in. But, once the developers are looking at the vulnerabilities, there are several tools for the developers to review the scan results. Typically, there's a web UI of some sort that will allow them to go to review the results. IDE integrations are a very popular method because it allows the developer to actually review the vulnerability right where their code is, and they can modify their code in place, potentially resolving the vulnerability. And then of course, in the CI/CD control panels, a lot of time there's a scan summary that at least lets them understand, what my vulnerabilities were from the last build. And again, back with the webhook integration, that's more of a direct integration into the software development lifecycle. So what that typically does is it actually throws a scan summary right into the pull request. And I'll get into this deeper if the pull request is not familiar with a familiar term for you. But essentially, the pull request is a peer review tool, right? And so I mentioned back a few slides ago that peer reviews might be more focused on security based reviews, but this gives them actually a kind of a pointed way, a list of, hey, here's a list of vulnerabilities that are in this pull request. So instead of looking for them each manually, now I have a really nice way of actually just looking at a menu of them, determining which ones of those I really care about because maybe they are high priority, and I can go right to the place where I can look at details of that vulnerability. And then with every software release, there's always some set of outstanding vulnerabilities, right? You know, every piece of software has some sort of bug or defect, both known and unknown. And really, when things are released, it's a matter of accepting the risk of that, that defect or bug that you do know about. So what we can do with the integration with the SDLC is that we can basically open defect or issues in the issue tracker. And just briefly, an issue tracker is typically something used in software development to collect things like bug reports, you know, feature requests, or even you know, descriptions of work that needs to be done. And often these are, you know, assessed, you know, with I guess estimations of effort. And this is kind of the primary place where developers go to both understand what they need to do, and allows project managers to assign work and basically expect work to get done based on capacity of the team. And then of course, developer training, right? So you have your vulnerabilities, you have your scanning, and now your developers are saying, well, okay, so I see a vulnerability, what do I do now? It's an unfortunate fact that many developers do not understand security vulnerabilities. A lot of them will, there's several of them, or well, some subset of them will go and understand these vulnerabilities, do their own research, and they'll get it right away. It's very easy. Some of them will need a little bit more leading. And in a lot of cases, and that's most of them, right? So web-based training solutions are very effective for training developers to not only recognize, but understand the nature of these vulnerabilities. Understanding the nature is actually, you know, the why of the vulnerability, and that helps them really understand. And when they know the nature of the vulnerability, they do a fix. The fix usually is the right fix the first time, versus they try several different things to fix it, and the fixes never stick, right? They keep resulting in different vulnerabilities. Of course, then mentorship is also a very big thing, and this is a cultural thing in most development teams, right? Where you have more senior developers mentoring the more junior developers, or even newer senior developers, right? So typically, your senior developers are designated as security champions. That's kind of a normal approach. And the security champions are the ones that try and advocate the use and application of security, and the knowledge or knowing the knowledge of how these vulnerabilities manifest. And they work with the junior developers to learn how to remediate these vulnerabilities, how they manifest, and really understand the depths of the vulnerabilities. And so what happens is, as the senior developers move on to, you know, maybe they're promoted, maybe they move to different organizations, the junior developers now become the senior developers. They become the security champions. And eventually you get this culture of security focus, and it just becomes second nature. And anybody that comes new to the team is just adopts that culture, and pretty soon everybody is kind of security focused. Okay, so benefits of an AppSec program. Again, this is pretty brief. So in terms of risk management, right, that's kind of the big one. Of course, if you proactively detect and address vulnerabilities, you're lowering your risk, right? Especially if you don't do scanning now, you really don't know what you don't know, and it could be pretty big. You know, and even if you are scanning and not maybe addressing 100% of the vulnerabilities, because not everybody does, right? There's some that are really infeasible to attack, because maybe there's some deployment method that's mitigating that attack vector. At least you understand the risks you're accepting when that software is deployed with known vulnerabilities. Then of course, your lower cost of delivery, right? The earlier vulnerability is detected, the less expensive it is to fix. And this goes back to, you know, the architectural flaws that if you don't detect those vulnerabilities introduced by architectural flaws until the end of the development lifecycle, that's a very expensive fix to implement, because it may mean that you have major portions of the software to rewrite. And then of course, if you have a security-focused development culture, it reduces the introduction, over time, it reduces the introduction of vulnerabilities, right? Because everybody knows, hey, don't do that because you're gonna introduce a vulnerability that we're gonna have to fix, right? And then of course, your AppSec team is gonna scale across the organization. You know, many of our customers, they have a very small AppSec team. Sometimes it's just, you know, not even really an AppSec team at all. It's more of like a group of developers that are really concerned. So what some of our customers tend to do is they aggregate, you know, vulnerability data, especially if they have a lot of projects they're scanning. And this allows the AppSec team to focus on the highest risk areas of the application development process. You know, right now, you may have multiple or several, maybe what you would call flagship products, right? Things that are, everybody knows about. These are the major projects everybody works on. And, you know, those are the easy ones to identify. But it's very common for much smaller projects, and there will be many much smaller projects that potentially support the operation of those bigger projects. And, you know, in aggregate, you know, some of those combined, if they have vulnerabilities, could lead to easily exploitable vulnerabilities in your flagship product. So, you know, it's a good idea to understand what vulnerabilities you have across all projects. And of course, as you're scanning, you can aggregate that data, maybe make some, you know, reporting dashboards on it, so you can understand, you know, which teams need, you know, the most attention at any time. And I think with that, that's pretty much it. I think we can open it for questions if anybody has any specific questions.
Great, that sounds good, Nathan. Thank you very much. Yeah, if anybody does have a question, of course, you may you know, throw it in the chat, or you could just unmute for a second and put it out there. And if nobody has any questions, that's fine too. Who was I going to put over here just to speak a little bit? Kurt, yes, yeah. Would you like to quickly chat for a bit?
Yeah, I would. Hello, everyone. Kurt Risley. I actually get to do the fun part of this and actually conduct the challenge, is what we call it. You call it a little mini tournament or something, and it really kind of goes into the tail end of what Nathan was talking about, as far as just testing your skill level on how to code more securely. So let's just make this fun. But a little housekeeping: anybody who registered for this event, you should have received an email. And what you need to do is find that email, and if it maybe went to junk or something like that, look for it, because you need to log into our platform so that you can take the challenge. And let me just give everybody a little overview, and then I'll do more within the breakout room. But the challenge is very simple. It's 10 questions. There's 60 seconds each. The quicker and correctly you answer them, the higher the score you get. So we are going to give away prizes for the top 3, as you saw when you registered. But if there's any questions, but my ask is that if any of you registered, please go in. You will be asked to log in and put a password in, and then it will ask you to select a primary language. Don't worry about that, just select one. I do want all of you to know that you will have access to this for a few weeks, and you can play around and take some courses for free and enjoy it, but that's just a high level, just a little housekeeping there, unless there's any questions.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've got 8 registered people going in, actually, ready to go into the breakout room. Those are the folks that had registered ahead of time and are, of course, here in the Zoom meeting.
LJ, I think there's a question on the chat. Stephen is asking, he didn't register the Code Bash contest. What should he do?
Kurt, is there ability?
Yeah, actually, all I do is just send an invite. So all I need is you could throw it in the chat, and I will send a invitation to you. You select that, log in, and you'll be ready. And then in the breakout room, I'll get things going.
So Stephen Rhodes, if you want, you may send a quick note to Kurt Risley. Okay. And then I will add him to the breakout room as well. Everyone else, though, stay in the main meeting here, and we're going to continue on with some other talk. Just give us a few minutes, and we'll get things going. So, Kurt, are you going to pop over to the breakout?
So I'm like you. It's the first time I've gone to a breakout. I use
No
Zoom
worries.
a lot, but I'm trying to see where I would find that.
It's down at the bottom, and I believe the breakout room now. I need to apologies to everyone else as well. Yeah. Boom. I believe it's open all rooms, and the breakout room is ready to go. Yeah. Folks are being put in there. Kurt, I believe, has gone in as well. All right. For the rest of us, we are still in the main meeting. Stephen, would you like to give a quick couple of words here?
Yes, thank you so much. So a bit of a preamble, and it was a bit of a switch. I should have mentioned it earlier, so my apologies. Matt Rose got pulled into an emergency, was unable to attend. So thank you for coming out. For the second half, we had a change in the agenda and decided to pivot and really talk about at an operational level where and what you start, how do you begin to implement a program of this nature, and what are the outcomes? You know, what are some of the low-hanging fruit that you can glean from a program of this type? From customers, we've heard a lot of times where they just look and they think there's a lot that they've got to do. How do you prioritize? How do you stack rank them? And then how do you connect back to the business to really discern what are the priorities? And then how do I allocate my resources accordingly? So with that, this second session is really more from a services perspective. The optics are around that. So if you have got questions, you can certainly bring it up with Nathan. At the same time, had intended to really open this up and say, you know, back to reiterating, if you wanted that free scan of an application in one repo, for instance, you know, we'd be happy to give free of charge a half day of services to kind of go through the results and help you evaluate your application and where and what to prioritize, especially with the experience that we've got having been in business for 10 years. So with that said, if we can turn it back to Nathan, he's got the second portion of his deck ready to go.
All right, thank you, everyone. So this is a fairly condensed slide deck. Hopefully I don't go past time too much. So again, operationalizing DevSecOps, right? This is another one of those things that I think I could also talk all day about. You know, a lot of moving parts here, but you know, bottom line, it's really not that difficult. A lot of it is really depending on you know, some of your organizational you know, choices and tools and things like that. But you know, as I mentioned in the last talk, you know, some of the a lot of our customers, in terms of, you know, operationalizing their AppSec team or their AppSec program, you know, they start with the AppSec team kind of advocating the introduction of automation, right? And so, you know, back we talked about you know, introducing the automated scans. So once you've got to that point where you've chosen the tool, you know, and it's time to roll it out, you know, often the AppSec team starts with the SAST, which is the static application security testing again. It's often one component of many, right? It's usually combined with many types of automated testing, but because it's really the easiest to adopt because there's no build or runtime, it's usually the low-hanging fruit. This is where everybody starts. And then from there, they build the maturity of their AppSec program by introducing, you know, if it's not, you know, other tools, it's more advanced, types of scans where they're looking for different types of vulnerabilities and digging deeper into what their exposure is. And so what that entails is, the AppSec team does the initial, evaluation and learning on the tool, the SaaS tool. And the AppSec team will typically target the highest profile applications for the initial scan, and they'll perform that initial scan. And every organization has a few of their highest profile, and then they have, like I mentioned before, they have several smaller projects. They perform this initial round of scanning of the higher profile applications to really understand the risk of, if it's not their flagship, it's something that's really important to their organization. And that allows them to, prioritize their immediate risk reduction activities. And in a lot of cases, the customers will look for things like SQL injection or cross-site scripting as not only the most common vulnerabilities, but often they're the easiest to detect. And then once those are remediated or either remediated or disproven as not actually being problems, they sort of dig deeper and start asking for more, maybe command injection vulnerabilities and things of that nature. Something a little more deeper than just SQL injection and cross-site scripting. And so as part of that, often they engage Checkmarx professional services. And so a lot of our solution architects, people that work on my same team, usually help kickstart the AppSec program, right? All of our PS engineers have some level of software development background. Myself, I've been doing software development for better than 2 decades. And that's not counting, how much code I wrote as a kid. So, what we typically do is we educate, not only about best practices in terms of scanning and integrating automation into your, development, DevOps or DevSecOps now, because you're scanning, right? We'll also work with your team and review the results. And sometimes that's an initial, pass over with maybe the AppSec team because they see so many things, they want maybe clarification so they can speak to the development team about them and understand, what these vulnerabilities really mean. Some developers will wave off vulnerabilities and say, yeah, everything's behind the firewall, we don't need to address anything. And sometimes the AppSec team wants, to have the ability to converse with the developer on their level. In some cases, we'll actually work with the development team. And even though we may not understand completely, the architecture of the program, we may not understand the purpose of the program. In a lot of cases, we can look at the vulnerabilities, we can understand the pattern that some of these vulnerabilities take within implementation, and we can help the developers determine by asking kind of the right questions if it's something they need to look at deeper in terms of, it may truly be a vulnerability they need to address. And again, as Stephen mentioned, there's some incentive here to get some free time with PS and maybe do a scan on one of your repositories if you'd like. So let's see. So in terms of, organizational adoption success factors. So now you have scanning, you're integrated in with your software, your DevOps. And, again, how do you get developers to pick up the vulnerabilities? How do you get them accept the vulnerabilities? How do you get them to actually look at them periodically, right? So again, your security champion model is very effective. Often, they're the ones that are the most, engaged in making sure that the software is, released and it's secure. I know from my perspective, when I was the security champion for a fintech company, I was actually the lead of the development team. My thing was, well, I don't want software I wrote going out there and being in the news because somebody stole a bunch of credit card numbers and stuff I wrote allowed it to happen. That would be a very, very bad thing for me. And so that type of advocacy helps the other developers kind of take pride in what they're doing and take pride in the fact that they're writing very secure software. Of course, training is always very helpful. You know, in the models that I've worked with, and back when I was doing lead development, there was really no, it was pretty nascent in terms of the documentation of vulnerabilities. There was not a lot of online training, and so we would do essentially advocacy, you know, and mentorship. Again, you know, web-based training, very effective. You know, there's a lot of stuff you can Google out there, but a lot of the web-based training that's available really focuses the developers on understanding the nature of the vulnerabilities and how to remediate them. And then, of course, you know, integrating scanning with and result consumption into their tool set, you know, very important. So IDE integrations, where the developers can look at the vulnerabilities alongside their code and make code changes. And then, of course, scan summaries on pull requests. And I'll go into that a little bit more detail in a couple of slides. That's actually the thing to do now. We have so many people moving to doing, you know, essentially using webhooks for this purpose, so that you can see the scan summaries in the pull request. And I'll explain in a little bit where what they're doing actually is they're preventing delivery of vulnerable code rather than detecting it and fixing it. So before the code is actually delivered, they're detecting the vulnerabilities and not allowing the vulnerable code to be delivered. And so again, this is the this is kind of the outline of that SDLC integration, right? So it's essentially automating vulnerability lifecycle, right? So it's invoking the scans via a webhook in the source control management system. And again, it provides the summary of the vulnerabilities in the pull request comments. And it also allows the automated opening and closing of vulnerabilities that are found and fixed in the delivery branch through the issue tracker. And then, of course, you can optionally block the delivery of vulnerable code, which means that, you know, your main branch, your delivery branch, is typically a lot higher quality than maybe your feature branch or a bug fix branch. And peer review and scanning prevents, you know, new code from actually reaching the delivery branch with vulnerabilities. And the great thing about this, and a lot of customers really like this, is that the developers can perform self-service automated scan enablement, because it's a very rote process of, you know, here's some very high level, you know, one-page documentation, and here's the value you paste into a webhook configuration to start your scans. And developers like that because it takes, you know, literally 5 minutes for them to do, and they make, you know, AppSec happy. It's something easy to check off their list of stuff to do, and then AppSec, you know, they get the results right into the source control management as they're doing their work. Let's see. So this is an example of the pull request comment with the vulnerability summary. So essentially, the way the workflow works is that, you know, a developer will work on potentially a feature branch or a bug fix branch. And when they're done with their development, they'll open what's called a pull request for delivery of those code changes to a delivery branch. And this is a peer review tool where the pull request, you know, typically allows a reviewer or a maintainer to converse with the author of the code and ask questions about, you know, the changes they made. And so to augment that, this summary is also placed in the pull request as a comment. And it gives a nice, you know, just table of, you know, at least I have the number of, you know, severity counts, but I also have links directly to details about the vulnerability. So as a reviewer, I can go directly into a vulnerability as part of my review, assess if that's something I should be worried about or not, and I can converse with the author about fixing it. And then, of course, there's some rules that you can implement. A very popular one is you're not allowed to do a merge unless if there's a high severity count greater than 0. So it automatically can block the merge if the merge block meets the criteria. Many customers start out with no criteria for blocking, making it kind of a voluntary block. And then later on they impose, you know, things like no high severities, and maybe they'll go down to no mediums, something a little more restrictive over time. And why this works, and I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, is that you'll have, as part of software development, multiple development efforts happening concurrently. It's all in parallel, right? You may have one part of your team working on a feature branch, maybe another part of your team working on a bug fix branch. They're all working in parallel. They all deliver maybe at different times, but essentially when they're done developing, they're going to open a pull request to take the work that they've done and merge it into your delivery branch, which is often noted as the master branch. And then the maintainer or the lead of the master of the project can do a review before allowing the merge. And so one of the great things about this is that it allows the delivery of one or the other or both, right? So let's say in this case, the feature branch didn't introduce any new vulnerabilities as part of the changes, and the maintainer says, hey, I'm going to accept this one into delivery. But the bug fix, assuming there was no dependency on anything else for the bug fix, maybe introduce some more vulnerabilities. The maintainer says, well, I think you need to do a little bit more work on that, so I'm not going to merge that into the delivery branch. And so it gives the flexibility to move forward on things that don't introduce vulnerabilities while holding back things that do introduce vulnerabilities. And then of course you can talk about impact of not delivering a certain feature or a bug fix in time, but that's a different conversation. What the point of this is that your delivery branch maintains kind of a state of equilibrium of cleanliness and quality, and it's gated only by the speed of the development, or the quality of the development. And of course, some of the tools that that are typical of these tools are, and I had mentioned this earlier, where there's some IDE integration. This is an example of a web-based integration where you can evaluate code next to some tools that allow the developer to click through the vulnerable data flow. And so in this example, on the right-hand side, it's showing the path of the data coming from where vulnerable data or untrusted data enters the application. And each one of those squares is something that the developer can click on and be led through the code to see where the vulnerability actually manifests down at the end of the data path. So it gives the developer an idea of how the data is coming into the system and how it's getting processed, so they can best assess where to perform their fix. And in some cases, there's some really nice tools that help speed along some of that remediation, because a very common problem will be that, hey, we have these vulnerabilities and I keep fixing the same thing. Essentially, I have the same pattern of fix in multiple files. Well, there's some tools that you can use that will recognize, hey, I have multiple data flow paths and hey, they all converge into one spot. So, your data path convergence essentially is your best fix location. So it's more of a productivity tool where the developer, when they're trying to assess how to approach it, just doesn't dive into it and throw some code at it to try and get the scanner to shut up, right? And I've seen developers rename variables, try and hide what's going on to get away from the scanner. Sometimes the scanner, they trick the scanner, sometimes they don't, but in a lot of cases, that's a reaction to not really knowing the best place to fix it. So a lot of tools available to allow the developer to, efficiently and expeditiously fix those issues. So I think with that, that's kind of the end of what I had. Is there any questions I can answer?
Anybody with questions, you can put it up in the chat, or if you can unmute yourself too, you may shout it out.
This is Johnson. a quick question. So do you have any sort of, or do you guys recommend any open source tools that can help with this kind of work as well?
So, so actually, we have several open source tools that are available that we publish. And in fact, this workflow that I'm mentioning with the pull request integration, the SDLC integration is fully open source. It of course uses our proprietary part of what we do, but it is an open source, completely freely available workflow tool that you can install to get that workflow. If you're talking more about open source tools to help, I guess, maybe is it more of a open source tool to help find vulnerabilities?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, there are probably several out there. I know GitHub just implemented some workflow capabilities, some detection. I know I did actually a port to our platform of Trufflehog, if anybody's familiar with that, to detect things like embedded passwords or AWS keys or you know, private keys. The thing is with a lot of these open source tools is they don't have kind of the momentum that, you know, an appropriate R&D team has. And, you know, we have a lot of people that have many years experience in software development, writing these queries for vulnerabilities. And so that's kind of the benefit of having a tool like ours versus something in open source. In open source, you'll get some information that will help. But again, you know, maybe that's something, and I've seen customers do this where they use open source tools in addition to proprietary tools, because they're just saying, well, I'm just gonna, you know, do a scatter shot to try and catch everything that I possibly can. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it gives you so much information, especially the open source tools where they're not very refined, that it's just too much to really feasibly assess. Because if you have an open source tool, you know, triggering, I don't know, 10,000 vulnerabilities that may be false positive, may not be, sometimes that's really hard to really go through and assess in detail.
Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Any other questions from anybody? Excuse me. Kevin Tucker, is anybody here? It says, is this tool based out of OWASP or NIST?
So our tool has some what we call presets, which will perform queries, at least for OWASP. I'm not sure about NIST. There probably is a preset for it, but essentially think about the preset as a risk profile. And so there are queries that will go along the guidelines of OWASP and try and find things like OWASP top 10. I think we have several, at least 3 different years worth of the top 10 where we have a preset for it. And I believe there's some NIST presets in there. I haven't checked for that lately, but you know, that's hopefully that answers the question.
All right, cool. Thank you very much. The breakout room, the folks that went and did the code bash, they should all be back. Kurt, why don't you give a little chat about how it went, what you saw?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. It looks like we had a good little friendly competition here. Obviously, we'd be happy to do it down the road if there's more interest. But Lee made a very good point. All of the attendees today, we'd be happy to provide you an invite to go into what we call code bashing, and it is our e-learning platform. This isn't boring videos. These are 5 to 8 minute lessons. They're interactive. You get to witness, you know, a hack occur and understand how to remediate it. They're fun and engaging, so you can just play around in this solution for a few weeks. And if you have questions, obviously you have my email as well as Stephen's and Nathan's, and we'd be happy to answer any questions. And unless anybody has any questions for me.
I don't have any questions myself, but that's really generous. Thank you very much to have that offer out to everybody. Anybody that was in the code bash, do you want to pipe in either on the chat or just say how much you liked it, or perhaps it was too easy? Anybody out there? Ah,
I
there we go.
would say I really enjoyed it. I think it was like a refresher, especially if you pick the language that you're not necessarily working in every day. And then looking through code bashing itself, it seems like a great resource to learn different material in a fun and, like Kurt said, in a way that's not just boring videos. It's actually like challenges, and it helps you walk through things.
Great. That sounds awesome. Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else out there want to make a comment or suggestion? Comments are better. Having said that, of course, part of joining for the Code Bash was to win some prizes. Kurt, are you guys going to be sending out notes to the folks that perhaps came in first, second, third?
Yes, we'll be doing
Okay.
that. They basically will receive an email probably in the next 5 to 10 minutes as an e-gift from Amazon.
Wow.
Okay.
That's really awesome. So everybody,
Yeah.
I hope you gave the right email address.
That's
everybody from Checkmarx, everybody that joined us here, again, thank you very much. I am still uniquely enthralled, I'm using a lot of words here, at how we get this stuff done within an hour. I put a little comment in that I was going to extend this to 9:10 if we needed to, but just because all of you that joined are hosts tonight, Checkmarx, or sponsors, I should say, Checkmarx. You guys kept this really succinct. You made this work even with a last-minute change, and our thoughts go out to Matt out there and his family. But the big part about this is that we are proving ourselves yet again that we can do this, the way it's scheduled, the way we want to get it done. So please, everybody, keep joining, of course, and then take the same effort, the same attitude out to everything that we do out there. Johnson, do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, if I may just add a few comments as well. I mean, like I said, this is our second one. And, Lee John and I have made it a point to make sure that the next one and then the next one after that are going to be even better. So if you thought the code bashing was good, just wait till you see the next one that's coming up very soon. Okay.
Awesome. Okay.
That's pressure on you, Lee John. We need to get some,
I know. We got to get it going.
Right.
Now, of course, everybody that joined on the Zoom meeting, we have our Toronto cybersecurity meetup group. Some of you may be in there already, some may not. I'm going to resend that invite out to the meetup group, just a place where we all come together. Of course, go to csnp.org. You can join the Slack channel to get more information. CSNP has chapters all across the U.S. There's one in Africa, one in India. We've got the first one here in Canada. So there's a lot of really great opportunity to get involved with the other chapters even, and the other webinars. We tend to have one every Wednesday, sometimes Thursdays as well. I see that we've been doing as well either Tuesday or Wednesday noon session a couple of times. So we're really getting involved to have a lot of opportunity there. Of course, all of these webinars and meetings are recorded, and they will be put up in the private YouTube channel as well, or Vimeo. I apologize that I don't remember right now. So you are able to refer back, and especially if there was something that you really thought, man, I remember they talked about something really great on that July 8th session, and I just got to go find it. So go and find it. Anyways, without anything else, it's 8:58. Unless anybody else pings in the next 15 seconds in the group chat, I think we're good. Checkmark folks, go ahead and say anything else. Jeff, Claire, I just see you popped in. You want to say something?
Yeah, I'm also I'm an SE at Checkmarx. I just wanted to pile on with Nathan's comment, his great presentation. We do have a preset for NIST. I just wanted to make sure that we knew that before we wrapped up the call. I know he said he wasn't sure, but I can confirm that for him.
All right, cool. I see a few people in the chat saying thank you and saying it was great even to me in a little private channel as well. So Checkmarx guys, you guys have done a great job. Thank you. Thank you for making this our second event a little bit more attended than the first one. And that's really what we strive for. So we will have you back. and I appreciate you all, and I appreciate all of our attendees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. That's a lot of fun.